Well, thanks. Welcome back, everyone. I just want to remind you that in that chat function, you are able to chat with everyone now. Questions, in case they get a little bit lost, just swing on over to the Q&A in the middle of your screen on the bottom. That'll go directly to us as hosts, but of course, we're checking the chat as well. But I do want to introduce our next speaker. This is going to be Lena. She's the VP of Operations at Main Street currently. Lena, welcome. And it looks like you used to be the product operations for Google Small Business Division, so tons of experience here. Lena, I will hand it over to you.
Hello, thanks for the warm welcome, Haley. Appreciate it. Okay, let me get going here and start by sharing my slides. Okay, and I can still see a couple of faces here. Awesome. All right. Well, hello, everyone. I want to say good morning because it's morning for me, but I see that everyone is coming in from all over the world. So good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm super excited to talk to you guys a bit about how to assemble your dream team and my experience with that. All right. Now, if I can click to the next slide. Yep, perfect. All right. Hello, I'm Lena. I'm going to make a tiny correction to what Haley just said. I'm the former VP of Ops at Main Street and also worked at the head of SMB product ops at Google. Currently taking a bit of a sabbatical, taking care of my new and small family, which has been a treat. I built and led teams of 5 up to 40 and a few more people in both these like corp and startup settings, and really enjoy it. I try to kind of describe what makes work feel magical for me, and it is the like building and managing great teams, and with these teams, getting stuff done and having impact on the organization and on our customers. So, yeah, I think that's why I'm excited to talk a little bit about how to assemble a dream team. And I'd say let's dive right in. It's a big topic and we have very little time, it feels like. So how to assemble your dream team? Let's start by maybe defining what a dream team is. Some might say, oh, it's a group of really high performers. In theory, that sounds great. In practice, I found that's really impossible. So let's work with a realistic expectation. Some might say a group of people who feels like family. Frankly, that's my least favorite definition of a dream team. Could go on and on why that is. I really encourage you guys to look up an email that Shopify CEO Toby Lütke sent to his team, I think maybe in 2020. And he kind of goes into why it's not family, it's a team. And I think he has a really great perspective on that. Maybe it's a group of people who work well together. We're coming a whole lot closer with this. I think it's a little fluffy. We're not quite there yet, but there's something there, working well together. So this is my definition of it. And this might feel right to you, and your personal definition might be a little bit different, right? That's okay. To me, a group of people who are able and coachable to do a job, or able or coachable to do a given job, who are motivated and want to do that job and more, right? Jobs evolve. We all need to reach out of our comfort zones here and there. So people who can do that and want to do that, and folks who share a set of work-related values. And so that's my definition. And what we're going to talk about in the next 15, 20 minutes or so is around, hey, how do we go from here, right? And so I've tried to really boil it down to my most effective levers to build dream teams, right? Like if we think about this funnel from how are we building teams, right? From like defining a role to attracting candidates, interviewing, signing and negotiating with them, their onboarding in a remote world or not, and their management. Could probably write a book about that. I try to pick the ones that are closest to my heart and that I care most about, and that I've seen most to be most effective in my roles. So let's chat about team values, role or job definition, interviewing, and management. All right, cool. So first on this list was team values. Why do I think that team values are so important? I actually think that they reflect what you as a manager stand for and how you operate. And in some way, that also translates into what you expect from your team. I think team values also have this wonderful effect of having or setting shared expectations across roles and levels of seniority, right? So independent of if you are a really new employee who has like their very first job, or a pretty seasoned manager with reports or maybe managers under you, if we have a shared set of values, kind of brings all of us together and holds all of us accountable towards the same set of things, which influences how we work. Now, you might wonder, right, like how do we get to our team values? How do you as a manager get to your team values? And I can tell you, like, if you start Googling this, there's lots of like um, courses and so on that you can book and pay for and so on. And frankly, I haven't done any of those. So those might be totally worth it. My cheap and scrappy approach is the following. Start with a long list of values, right? Like there's plenty of options in Google world out there, to be honest. I'm happy to share a link later on. Ponder over this list, prioritize, strike through what you don't like, what doesn't feel right, right? Sleep on it and maybe discuss it with friends or people you've worked with. Really important there is don't go for what sounds good, right? Like many values really sound good, but maybe they don't feel quite right. Maybe they don't feel right to who you are as a manager and how you want your team to operate. Things that help me kind of drill down are questions like, what makes a brilliant coworker for you or a brilliant teammate member? And who do you admire in this outside world, right? Like who's your role model in the work context and why? And what's really important to you and what values, maybe most importantly, do you live by? Now, someone asked me this question before. Do you as a manager just do this yourself, or do you make it a team exercise, right? And I can see pros and cons for both scenarios. For me personally, I love to do a lot of things in a team context. For this specific task, I did it myself, mostly because once I started reflecting, it felt like this is not something that I want to compromise on. I want to build a really strong team, specifically when we were in a world of like hyperscale and we hired and hired and hired so many folks. I didn't want to compromise on things that were really, really important to me and that I wanted my team to run with. And then ultimately, like I'd encourage you to share these values openly, right? Like if you don't communicate them to your team, how would folks know what you think or how you operate and how you want your team to operate? So just as a, if you're curious, these are team values that are important to me. Now, some of you might say that the first ones aren't really values, but I draw these up myself. So nobody's making any rules. For me, it's really important that we give and receive each other open feedback. I also want folks to come with recommendations rather than with questions, right? Asking questions, as David mentioned in the earlier section of the summit, is really, really important. But I would love for questions oftentimes to be coupled with recommendations. I would do it like this. What do you think, right? Like, or here are the options. I would do that. I want folks to be resourceful, accountable, reliable, and I really appreciate if people care about their work, their coworkers, our customers, the business. So this worked for me, and these are values that we've implemented in my last team, and that felt really good, and I think had a positive effect. Your values might be totally different, and that's totally fine and probably wanted, right? Like your list might look like more like this, and that's really helpful and great as well. All right. We're moving on to the next point in this funnel, right? Role definition. And I think determining goals and skills required to achieve a job is really important to do early on. Plus, becoming really aware of how much support do you want to provide for that given role, right? Lots of text on this slide, I apologize. So on the left, right, like think about what do you need this role or this job, this person in this job to achieve today, right? Think about what does success look like, what needs to get done. None of this is new to you, I'm sure. Maybe broaden it up, or actually I would recommend to broaden it up more to define a meaningful area of ownership. None of us love just being given a task list of things, right? Like do these things every week. We want to own something, or most of us want to own something and develop our own area of ownership and expertise. So give people that opportunity and start with that when defining a role. Do that for your world today, but also for the future. Maybe 6 to 12 months is the right time period for your team, your company. Maybe it's a longer time period, right? But fact is, your company, your team, your product, customers, they all will evolve. So will that role. And whoever you put in that role will really crave growth opportunities. So make sure that you already have in mind, where does this role go and how can I help this person evolve over time? Also worth considering, specifically when you think about writing a job description or so, right? Like, how do you achieve these goals that you just defined, right? And some things that really help you with determining kind of what level of seniority or experience you need are, what level of complexity do people need to navigate in this role? Do I need them to make decisions? What kind of decisions do they need to make these decisions independently? Or is the manager or someone else really closely involved? How do they communicate? Is it really strategic or tactical? Do you need them to be leaders and influence and whatnot? This list could go on and on, right? But think about what skills are needed to achieve these goals. And then I think the right level of seniority, after you wrote all of that down, will heavily depend on how much support you can provide to whoever you put in that role, right? Could be you could go for a pretty junior person with maybe 2 or 3 years of experience for any given role, but plan on heavily handholding and partnering and coaching them through their job or during their job. Or you say, oh, actually, I don't really have time, or I can't do that, or I don't want to do that. I need someone who's more senior who can be more independent. So take that into consideration and be really mindful when defining that role. All right. Now, once you've defined the job, the role, right? Like ask yourself, do we need to hire or not hire, right? And if the default answer is, oh, let's hire someone, right? It's easy in a fast growing startup. Maybe if you've just gotten some funding, right? We tend to go the hiring route. But fast forward a couple of years, you'll find yourself here. It'll feel like it's too many people, it's too loud, it's too bright, and it hurts my back. And you might have overhired, and it's not a great place to be. So when thinking about how do you get to your dream team, how do you staff up for the jobs that need to be done, I recommend to start by aiming to get the job done with today's resources. Think through, how can we get this done with today's resources, for how long? And then I also love consulting my peers and my current team and my direct reports to say, hey, like, we need to get this done, right? Like, what are your thoughts? How can we make this happen with today's resources? And maybe even go so far as to test it and just run with it for a while and see how it goes, if that's possible. Why is that so important? I think these conversations, specifically with your peers and with your current team, on this path to getting the job done with today's resources, will give you a big opportunity to become more efficient. Your team members, direct reports might have a really valuable perspective as to, hey, like, we can simplify this, right? Like, the job that needs to be done isn't actually that big, or we can merge it with this, or we can shuffle things around and make it easier. And so really explore these opportunities to make things easier, more efficient, and to restructure a little bit. And then secondly, your current team might crave growth opportunities, right? So if something new and exciting comes along and you always hire outside people, your current team doesn't get the opportunity to stretch and grow into these new jobs. So having that perspective or really helping them do what's needed at a given point in time will be hugely satisfying to them, I think. Great. I'm not keeping an eye on the chat, to be honest. So I don't think anything came in there. So Haley or Mary, let me know if I'm overseeing anything. Great. Now that we've kind of defined what we need, right, and who we want, or what we need to be done and what success looks like, let's find the perfect fit. And as I said, let's talk a little bit about interviews. And so the interview 101, after we've gone through kind of the definition of what a dream team looks like to me, it's probably pretty straightforward, right? I would love, or I want to get out of an interview, can the candidate do the job? Do they want to do the job? Can they grow beyond that given job that I have defined? That's the 101. I personally love taking all of this a step forward, and I call it interviews 201. Say, I want to put my heart and soul into these interviews. That's how important they are. I think sometimes, specifically if you have to do a lot of them, they're being regarded as kind of the necessary evil, and like on my list of things that I want to do in a given day, right? Like they kind of like stack up at the bottom, but they're so freaking important. So let's pour our heart and soul into these interviews. Now, how do we do this? I love to engineer this whole process and my interview to the best of my abilities. So the first thing I do is design a really good and thorough and mindful process. Now, the first point on this list kind of goes even before the actual interviewing, which is I try to become really specific about what do I look for in a resume, and I sit down with maybe even my people team if I have one of those on my team, and think with them like, given the skills and experiences that we just defined, what do we look for in resumes other than, oh, we want them to have like 5 years of job experience or whatever. I also try to be really, or I am really intentional about how many interviews should this person go through, and who is interviewing, who are the right people on my team to interview the specific candidate for the specific role. Maybe the most important 2 points on this list is I'm really specific around which topics do I want these interviewers to cover. And I get fairly tactical and maybe a little bit micromanagey about it, but frankly, they're doing me a favor by interviewing my candidates oftentimes, right? And so I want to make it as easy for them as possible, and want to take any headache out of it for them, right? And just say, hey, these are the things that I really want to focus on. I want you to focus on. If they're pretty junior, I even take the time to prep questions with them and maybe even practice with them. So they feel really confident. I feel really confident that they can go into these interviews and make the most out of that time. I also like to ask for feedback in writing. It's actually something that I took from my time at Google. Google is really specific about like taking really detailed notes during interviews, writing up a really detailed rationale as to why folks would hire or not hire the candidate. And so I like asking for that. Try not to influence each other, right? I don't want to hear what someone else thought from their interview before I have my interview, before I make my decision on hiring or no hiring, and give even feedback on feedback. Second part is, once you've kind of prepped the process, I try to optimize my own time with the candidate, right? And so it's a lot of stuff that you've probably heard about, right? Like interviews are a whole thing. We can go on and on. To me, the most important things are those 3 or 4 on this list. I'm prepping my hypothetical and experience-based scenarios and follow-up questions so I can have really in-depth conversations with candidates. I encourage candidates to structure their thoughts before responding. When we talk about kind of complex scenarios, complex case studies, I don't need them to kind of riff and answer on the spot. And I prefer for them to kind of go heads down for 2, 3, 4 minutes and structure their thoughts. And that much more mirrors what we would see in a real life scenario too, right? If we all take our time and think through complex stuff before we actually do the work. Third point on this list is my favorite. I acknowledge my first impression. Yes, I have a first impression in an interview oftentimes, and unfortunately, I can't make that first impression go away. I think, ooh, that's a great candidate, or I think that might not work out, but I acknowledge it, and then I actually try to work against it. So if I go in and I say, oh, that seems really difficult, like the first 2 or 3 sentences here really kind of turned me off already. I try to really lift that candidate up and really pull them in the different direction and kind of help them convince me almost, and help to convince myself that actually they are the right candidate. And sometimes that works and that's amazing, and sometimes it doesn't. And then I've done my best. And the other way around works too, right? If I feel like, oh my God, it's my dream candidate already, but I've only talked to them for 2 minutes, I try to like really hone in and kind of find the gaps and convince myself otherwise, hoping that that leads to the fairest outcome. And then lastly, I really aim for every candidate to have an energizing conversation with me, and make it as positive as possible for them. Great. So that's kind of it, right? Like we found a perfect candidate, maybe a second and a third and a fourth, and we've built the dream team, right? One might think, but it's not that easy, unfortunately, because we also need the manager's leadership in this to actually work as a dream team and make the most out of our time together. So at this point, I kind of expected that we would be short on time, and this is a big topic, of course. We can talk for hours and hours and hours. So let's do the speed run through this. I gave myself 3.5 billboards to summarize what I think are the most effective kind of leadership or ongoing management bits and pieces for me. So let's dive right in. 1, understand what motivates your team members and facilitate opportunities. Try to figure out what they like doing, and allow them to do so in their day-to-day jobs, or find projects or meetings where they can step up and do the things that they really crave on doing. I found that to be very, very satisfying for everyone involved and drive great energy. 2, be transparent and make yourself useful. That kind of 2 in 1, I must confess. Also use good judgment. Being transparent as a manager does not mean share every single thing that you hear from, I don't know, the C-suite or your board or your investors or so, right? But be as transparent as you can and share the relevant information with your folks at the relevant time. And make yourself useful is maybe even the most important piece on this list. Nobody likes a not useful manager, right? Like useful can take so many different shapes and forms, and you might have read in the chat about the 2 different types of managers, and I think for your management style, figure out what useful means. You might roll up your sleeves and dig in and help do the thing, or you might advocate for your team with higher management. Whatever it is, do the useful thing for your team. 3rd, become your team members' trusted cheerleader through performance issues. I think it's so easy in case of really difficult and ongoing performance issues to become a little hard and a little, maybe not annoyed, but kind of like really frustrated at, we're not seeing progress and why do I have to deal with this, right? Like it's freaking hard. But I really try to remember, like, hey, we're on the same team, right? Literally and figuratively. We're on the same team, and I really try, or my task it is to really help them succeed, and I'm their cheerleader, and I'm helping them from the sidelines to get through this, to get on the right track. And that's the energy I want to convey in these conversations. Here's the half, and I only need even a quarter of a billboard here, if you may say. Of course, lead by example. If you have defined your values, if you've communicated them, you're the one who needs to like step up and do this stuff that you said is important to you, and otherwise everything kind of falls to pieces. Okay, I think that was my speed run through. Oh yeah, a little summary, right? I dare you all to put it into action. Commit to one of the things today And if you want to, just let me know how it's going. I'll share my email on the next slide. So if you're actually doing one of the things and it works great or it doesn't work at all, I'd love to hear about it. So define your team values, scope a role, and make a mindful decision on whether or not to hire someone for it. Design a mindful interview process. Prepare and conduct a really energizing interviews. And then understand what motivates one of your team members. Build trust through transparent communication and make yourself really useful. And lastly, approach a performance issue by becoming a trusted cheerleader. Cool. All right. I think that's it. Thanks for listening to me. That was a really long monologue. And I hope we still have a little bit of time for Q&A.
Yeah, I just wanted to run in. I know we're kind of butting up to the break here, but we've gotten a lot of questions actually submitted to you.
All right.
That's great. I want to kind of address this because it's been asked in two different ways. So most of us out there, anyone attending, you're typically mid-level to a little bit more senior manager. So we're kind of in an interesting spot, and I just want to address where you guys are. Um, so say this role is coming up and these are the two questions. I don't want to read them directly, but I'm wondering if you can talk. So if you're communicating down to your team, how do you get their input of whether or not this role should be created if we're creating a new role? And then if you and your team decide that a role needs to be created, how do you then kind of advocate for that role to your company? Where does that, open feedback play into this?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Let me start by answering the first half around Haley. I think you said like how do we get feedback from our team whether or not to create a new role? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. I'm a big fan of playing with open cards, frankly, and kind of sitting down together, whether that's like as a big team or in smaller kind of one-on-one conversation, and say, hey, like here's the situation, right? Like we need to do all of these things, or here are new tasks that were added to our plate, or whatever the scenario might be, and we have to figure out how to get them done, right? And so getting their thoughts on, as I said before, like how could we do it in today's world with today's resources? What would that take? Really play that through. Maybe are there any things that would fall off of our plate if we have to prioritize this new thing or so, and really kind of draw up that world, and then consider, okay, like if we have a new role, what would that look like, right? Like what other responsibilities would we give that person? Is that really a full role? How do they fit in? And have that conversation with folks and be pretty direct about it. And if you have a trusted team, hopefully they can give you really meaningful feedback on it, right? And not just kind of default to, oh yeah, that sounds like a lot, right? Like let's just hire someone, right? Like maybe you have someone on that team like that, and then that's a great data point as well. And you as a manager, like you do your own reflection on that and maybe provide that feedback at some point. The second point around how do we advocate towards how do we advocate for that new role across the company? That's a great question, and one that I've kind of found myself in many times, or more than I admit. And I think in a way, it's a resourcing and staffing conversation, right, and a prioritization conversation. So I found that I see most success by, again, having really open conversations with whoever the decision maker is, or whoever the group of people is that I want on my team, right? And kind of laying it all out for them. And as a part of that, I think it's really helpful to think through scenarios or present scenarios, right? Like nobody loves to hear, oh, there's only one way and we need to hire. So present these alternative paths, right? Like what happens if we don't hire? Like what can we still do, and how do we prioritize, and what falls off of our plate, or where do we get slower or need to work differently? How could we shuffle things around internally, and how does the world look like if we're hiring someone, and why is that the right way to go in your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Lena, thank you for joining us today. I know we have to wrap up. I want to make sure that everyone has their time and their promised break. Our next speaker, if you guys kind of check that agenda, is set to happen at 2:20. I'm going to extend that 5 minutes back a little bit. So we'll see you back here at 2:25 Eastern time. Sorry, I don't have the breakdown to what that means in every time zone, but just expect you've got 10 minutes from about 11 minutes now until our next presentation. So I will let you guys go during this break. Feel free to grab water, grab snacks, do whatever you need. Come back and we'll see you soon.